So again, returning to our original agenda, we're going to stay in order now. Issue number 3 is the Department of Education, California Community Colleges, and the Prop 98 package to be found on page 6. We are back at the beginning. That's right. LAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Kenneth Capon with the Legislative Analyst's Office. The Senate package includes approximately $6 billion in new Proposition 98 funding compared to the funding level included in the 2015-16 Budget Act. Of that amount, $3.5 billion is related to increases from 2015-16 to 2016-17, and the remainder is related to increases in estimates of the prior year guarantee and some one-time resources. The total minimum guarantee under the Senate package is $71.9 billion in 2016-17. That reflects a $64 million increase over the May revision estimates for that year. Of that increase, $54 million is related to your recent adoption of the LAO property tax estimates. Although the bulk of those estimates offset the state's general fund obligation, they also result in a small increase to the total Proposition 98 funding level. In addition, the committee took action to adjust, or what we call rebench, the guarantee for the education component of the savings associated with Proposition 47, and that increases the guarantee by an additional $10 million. In terms of specific spending decisions, the centerpiece of the Senate package is an allocation of $3.1 billion to continue the implementation of the local control funding formula. In addition, the Senate package also includes $1.2 billion to pay down outstanding mandates for K-12 schools and an additional $106 million for the California community colleges. The Senate package does include some differences from the administration. I won't go through all of those, but I'll just cover a few at very high-level detail.
Please.
So the specific differences for K-12 schools include $200 million on a one-time basis for college readiness block grants. This is funding that schools would use to prepare students to be eligible for post-secondary institutions, as well as to increase the four-year graduation rate. So that might be used on such activities as counseling or professional development or instructional materials. The Senate package includes $60 million on a one-time basis to create or expand teacher residency programs. These would be targeted toward key shortage areas like special education and would give prospective teachers the opportunity to meet with and learn from more experienced mentor teachers. The Senate package includes $45 million for the California Collaborative on Educational Excellence. This is funding that would be used for statewide training for all districts regarding the new evaluation rubrics that are being adopted by the State Board of Education. Finally, the Senate package also rejects the $100 million that the administration had proposed for the Emergency Repair Revolving Loan Program. In terms, shifting gears a little bit to the community colleges, I think the changes there are a little bit smaller. The Senate package would redirect $30 million that the administration had proposed for the Basic Skills Initiative and instead put that towards transformation grant applications that have not received funding. I think there were 22 applications that weren't funded in that program, and so the Senate package would redirect money toward that purpose. In addition, the package includes $10 million for an increase to apportionment, so this is base funding that the colleges can use for any local purpose, and it would reject the May revision proposal to provide $25 million for innovation awards. Lastly, regarding preschool, there's $35 million in Proposition 98 funding to increase the standard reimbursement rate by 4%. With that, happy to answer any questions you may have about the package.
Thank you, sir, for highlighting some of the more significant differences between the Senate proposal and the Department of Finance's. One I don't know that you touched on, if you could comment with regard to, I think, about a $316 million difference in mandate backlog paydown.
Sure. So as far as the difference there, I think the Senate package is paying down a little bit less in the mandate backlog. It's the similar amount for the community colleges, but a difference of, I believe, about $180 million from the May revision to the Senate package for K-12 schools.
Can you remind us of where we are in the mandate backlog?
The state has made substantial progress on the backlog over the past few years. One issue that's come up now is that because the proposal is to provide all of the funding on a per pupil basis, more and more of that funding is going to districts that don't necessarily have outstanding claims. But the bulk of the backlog, we're down to just about a few billion, I think. For community colleges, I think it's all but eliminated for one district. For K-12 schools, most districts today no longer have any outstanding claims.
And we have statutory deadlines?
For the mandate backlog, there's really no specific timeline set forth in the Constitution or or in statute. There's been litigation over this in the past, but the courts have not required the state to adhere to any specific timeline for that repayment.
And the reason I ask that question is just to determine whether we have the discretion to be able to slow down the pay down slightly from what the governor is proposing.
I think you do. It's been a moving piece in several of the past discussions at the committee level and in conference, and so it does seem that you have some discretion as far as exactly how quickly you pay that
Do you happen to have, and don't mean to put you on the spot, do you happen to have a memory of what the current year pay down of that mandate backlog might be?
Well, for the proposed allocation for K-12 schools, it's $1.2 billion. I think we're estimating that about half of that would go toward reducing the backlog, maybe a little bit less. For community colleges, it's $106 million that's going toward the backlog.
Ms. Costa.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As the analyst has pointed out, really the differences between the administration and the Senate's proposed Proposition 98 package within the context of Prop 98 are not huge differences. Spending levels in 14-15 are slightly lower and 16-17 are slightly higher in the Senate's package. And then, of course, as we've talked about, there is the change that is reflected in the Senate package by adopting the analyst property tax revenues. I think that you've gone over some of kind of the bigger items that are the differences amongst the packages. On the issue of the mandate backlog, I would just continue to say that the administration remains supportive and committed to paying off our debts and liabilities, and we believe that although we have made great strides in recent years, we would like to continue that momentum and pay off this debt.
And again, there are many options here for us. I'm sure we share many of the same priorities, though we may rank them just slightly differently. Given that I know the governor has placed a lot of focus and concern energy with regard to four-year graduation rates, not only to benefit students so that they can reduce their mountain of debt, but also be able to get on with their lives, free up slots so that more people can enter into our system. Can you comment on a couple of differences between your and our proposals? The one significant one being the K-12 college readiness block grant, as the LAO had mentioned, could have the effect of increasing four-year graduation rates. And then also there's the additional $30 million funding for basic skills and student outcomes transformation grants.
Absolutely. It's, at least for the last several budgets, the administration has had a very sharp focus on the issue of graduation rates at our public universities. We don't have all of the details on the college readiness proposal in the Senate's package. I think, one of the differences is where the investment is occurring in the Senate's proposal. It's suggested that it's happening within the guarantee. Within our proposal, which is not before the committee right now for the CSU specifically, we we have a proposal in which we would offer them one-time funding for the development with the chancellor and the board of trustees of four-year graduation plans, both system-wide and at their campus level. So I think we're in agreement at the recognition of this particular issue and it needing to be addressed. I think the how and the funding is where we differ. For the basic skills, I will allow my colleague Chris Ferguson to talk about it in more detail, but in the current year, we did create an infusion of one-time funds for community colleges specifically towards basic skills based on some more recent research about highly effective practices for moving students out of basic skills into credit-bearing coursework, which again is a key factor in getting college students out and graduated on time. In the case of community colleges, transferring them to four-year institutions. We propose actually as a way to leverage that one-time funding, creating some ongoing funding for this purpose. And that was part of our original proposal to kind of weave together these funding streams for community colleges. In addition, we have proposals to really change the nature of basic skills at community colleges and to really link the funding more to outcomes and the ability to move students through their basic skill coursework in a more expedited manner.
Give it a try.
There we go. Chairman, Chris Ferguson with the Department of Finance. I think Ms. Costa summed up some of our recent efforts very well. In particular, on the transformation grant program, we were notified in late April, early May, that there were roughly 85 applications to participate in that program. Of the 85, 43 were funded. Another 22 would have been eligible to be funded. But clearly the administration and the Senate package alludes to this as well, continues the ongoing funding for basic skills. It just utilizes the first year to fund an additional $30 million in transformation grants, which would represent roughly the 22 that applied but did not receive funding.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Costa, I wanted to see if we might just have a brief conversation here with regard to early care and education. We cut about $1 billion out of the system in recent years as a result of the depth of the recession. We have been slowly, if incrementally, making some reinvestments in recent years, and I don't want to be disrespectful of those minor steps, but there's a huge need that needs yet to be addressed. I think the total child care reinvestment this year is in the neighborhood of around $100 million. Something we talked about last year, it's not in either of our proposals, I recognize that, so I don't want to suggest otherwise, though I understand there might be some piece of this in the Assembly's consideration of its budget. So if the need is upwards of $800 million for round numbers sake, which was identified by the Legislative Women's Caucus as reinvestment in early care and education, we all agree that non-98 dollars just are not there. Do you see any opportunity for using Prop 98 funds as they have been historically used for this purpose? Clearly education, and given that we have so few other options to identify ongoing money for such an important issue as early care and education, something all of us recognize can attend to the achievement gap, can help keep youth out of incarceration as they grow, keep them in school, get a high school diploma, keep them from our criminal justice system later. People are in better health. It just has so many ramifications that if we invest early, we see dividends galore in later years. What is your game plan for this? Are we just going to stumble along at a 50 million, 100 million in years going forward, and hopefully the good times continue to roll? Or how do we finally address the huge gaping need here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have my colleague Jeff Bell, who will certainly speak in more detail about this. I mean, I can say and appreciate that kind of what's within the guarantee and what's outside of the guarantee is often a long-term conversation between the legislature and the administration, and there have been a number of different programs that have been in or outside of the guarantee, and this certainly falls within it. I think part of the conversation on early childhood education specifically that the administration embarked upon with our many stakeholder groups between the governor's budget and may revise, is really a twofold question, which is the funding portion, which you've identified, and those needs, but also the actual structure of the system as it exists now, and how to ensure that any future investments or increases are going into a system that is efficient and that is providing the services for the children and their family that I think we would all agree are necessary and appropriate. With that, I will turn it over to Jeff to talk in a little bit more detail about this specific proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Jeff Bell from Department of Finance. Just to kind of build on what Ms. Costa has stated, we were taking a very hard look at early education this year as part of our fall processes, and as we built into the spring, had a number of stakeholder meetings, a lot of conversations with a lot of groups as we think about early education and what that means here in California. As you well know, there's kind of a patchwork of services delivery models out there for early education, for preschool, transitional kindergarten, and what we saw as we've had a series of conversations and looked into a variety of the early education areas is it seems to us to make sense to take a look at the funding delivery model and provide that in a manner that allows the locals to make service delivery models that make the best sense to in their communities, and then address that first before we talk about providing significant additional resources to the existing patchwork. And so sort of rationalizing, if you will, our existing service delivery model first, and then entertaining additional discussions about resources, I think, as we look towards the future, was the approach that we took as we were looking at early education. So that's why when you see when you saw the approach that we brought out in January, the block grant approach, kind of ensuring that the early education environment would build sort of as the next level of the LCFF, if you will, ensuring that whatever funds that we did provide, for example, if you saw our model wanted to take those crucial state dollars and ensure that they were provided for those students who are either at risk or low income first, recognizing that the state simply doesn't have, at this point, the dollars to serve all the students in the state of California. Well, what do we do with those dollars that we do have? We make sure that we provide them for those students that are at risk or low income first. And that's the priority that was behind the approach that you saw in your subcommittees.
Thank you, sir. Senator Mitchell and then Senator Nielsen. And before you begin, Ms. Mitchell, I wanted to just suggest that maybe once we get this completed, we might take a little 10-minute break for everyone's needs and then continue. Yeah, I've got power bars for everybody, so. That's it. We're lean here. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me start by saying, with all due respect to Senator Block and the work of Budget Sub 1 Committee, and while I strongly support the vast majority of the investments included in both this Prop 98 package as well as other actions taken in Sub 1, as evidenced by my voting record since being elected to the Senate and the Assembly, I cannot support the package today. I cannot and will not support a paltry investment in early care and education, which the Senate plan represents at $99 million. Specifically in this package, the standard reimbursement rate increase of 4% equates to about $425 increase a year per child in child care centers across this state, whereas as a member of the Women's Caucus and a supporter of the Women's Caucus ask of the $800 million investment, in that package, the SRR proposed increase was 15%, which, based on our research and based on history, comes closer to what we know is appropriate in terms of providing high-quality early care and education experiences for what we all say on a regular basis are our most important Californians, and that's our young people. It was reported today that just one diaper won't do when a child needs 8 daily, and the opening bid for child care at less than $100 million doesn't come close to meeting the state's $800 million shortfall. And I think that line appropriately reflects my perspective as well as the perspective of many of our constituents. The administration talked about their stakeholder process. I would strongly encourage the administration to perhaps include the legislature and legislative staff in your future stakeholder processes, because I think we bring a perspective, an expertise, and perhaps value to the conversation. I think it's interesting as you drew the correlation between LCFF and our experience with early care and education and your desire to fix the patchwork quilt. I think oftentimes in these halls, we forget the fact that it was the legislature and past administrations that created the patchwork quilt, that families and providers in the community spend hours of their time trying to figure out. So I think we need to own the complicated nature of the system. We need to own our role in that. Any mother, parent, child care provider in the community in an effort to make it more complicated couldn't do the great job we have. And so we have to own that. However, I think we've got the order wrong. What was critical about LCFF was it reframed the funding mechanism of how K through 12 services were delivered. And in this instance, we're continuing to choke a system and starve it of critical resources it needs to be viable, and we want to shift the chairs on the deck instead of critical investment. And so I don't see the comparison to LCFF because it was done very differently for K through 12. So again, sir, with all due respect, I will not be supporting this package. I do hope that we have the opportunity as we go into conference committee to have a more robust conversation about the investment we are willing to make in California's youngest residents. I know the Assembly package is much richer than what we've put on the table. As a member of the Senate, I have to say that embarrasses me. And I hope that through conference committee, we'll be able to come up with a more reasonable investment, one that is affordable. Quite frankly, Mr. Chair, we've taken actions already in this committee today where we have identified savings, where we have not supported some of the investments the administration has asked for. Perhaps we look at some of those general fund dollars to look at the possibility for reinvestment in this critical public policy area that is in dire need of investment.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell. Senator Nielsen.
Just a couple of issues here. One, I'm concerned about the $20 million reduction from the startup funding for charter schools in the proposal here today, and also the cutting of the $180 million for the school fund repair, deferred maintenance. You know, and that one of the governor's noble efforts is to pay down the mandates, and we need to get about that. And this shifts that instead to base building for the future. And the governor has been focused on some of that debt retirement. I think that really is important. I didn't read much here where we're at in career tech ed, and I don't sit on the subcommittee for K-12 and community colleges. Where are we as far as the career tech ed? Have there been any retreating from anything in terms of our funding of the career tech ed, in terms of the incentive grants or the outright funding for the career tech ed program?
For career technical education, it's $900 million over 3 years. So the first year of funding will be $400 million, and that's set to go out in the coming fiscal year. In June of this year, and then towards the end of the fiscal year, followed by $300 million in 16-17 and $200 million in 17-18. So it's 900 over 3 years. There's been no retrenchment or reductions in that funding plan, and it's moving forward on the K-12 side.
Sure. And then on the community college side, the administration actually proposed and the Senate has supported, with some minor modifications to trailer bill language, a $200 million increase to support the Strong Workforce Program, which is targeting the career technical education type programs at community colleges. In addition, there's also a $48 million one-time as part of the Senate's package to continue the Career Pathways Initiative for one more year, with that funding ultimately being rolled into the Strong Workforce Program in 2017-18. That's a slight difference from the administration's package, which would have just continued the Career Pathways Initiative moving forward.
Thank you.
Senator Allen.
Well, we obviously sat through a long hearing the other day about this. I just want to bring up 2 points. First of all, on the charters issue, it seems as though there was some information that about the folks' desire to build a reserve that I really would have appreciated being made aware of in the context of the hearing last week. And so I want to just voice my concern about that. Secondly, I can't agree more with Senator Mitchell on the issue of early childhood, and I just vote for this, with the real hope that her message will be taken to heart. Similar comments to what I made at the hearing last week, but I really do think that our allocation here is disappointingly low in the area of early childhood education.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Senator Block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the allocation is disappointingly low, and I think our committee would agree that we are hoping that in conference there will be discussion of this issue and that we can find other places, maybe from general fund, maybe from Prop 98. There were very few unimportant areas from which we could take dollars. In the governor's budget presented to us in January, areas that have already been mentioned that were over allocated, there were few. Really, the bulk of the allocation, as my colleagues know, is in LCFF. So that if you're talking $800 million, that's where the money is. So a decision has to be made not by a subcommittee of 3 members, but by the Senate and the Assembly. Do we cut LCFF? There, I've said it. Do we cut LCFF to fund $800 million in early childhood education and care? And if I'm not going to make a judgment right now, both are extremely important. I think that is, though, a decision that shouldn't be made by a 3-person subcommittee, but should be made by the entire body. And that is our hope in bringing this forward, that in conference, both houses will get together and then both leaders with the governor and decide what is the adequate amount. We're not in any way saying that what is in this budget is the adequate amount. This, we hope, is just the starter, the floor for a discussion that will bring in all parties. I can tell you that the stakeholders didn't like the early education block grants that were initially proposed by the administration. We had long lines of people who spoke against that. So we did away with those block grants being responsive to the stakeholders. But now it's time to not quibble around the edges, not talk about a few dollars here and a few dollars there. Are we going to make the big investment or not? And if we are, that means some severe cuts to K-12 schools. Understand that. Having said that, moving on to happier items in this budget, a few things that have been mentioned, but I just want to highlight briefly. We as a committee did feel that more dollars needed to be put into things like a teacher residency pilot program, because we think teachers really are the place where our schools either succeed or fail. Good teachers, well-qualified teachers, well-prepared teachers. So we voted to give new life to the Apple program, as Senator Pavley has, the Assumption Program of Loans for Education, to get more good teachers into fields, both disciplines and geographic areas where there are teacher shortages. We put money into a teacher residency program. We put money into a teacher preparation grant. We feel that all of our students deserve to have the highest quality teachers they can have, and that doesn't mean you evaluate and bump out teachers that aren't performing well. It means you train teachers well, and if there are some that aren't performing as well as you'd wish, you give them the professional development they need. So in K-12, beyond just the general LCFF, which is the bulk of the budget we deal with in Sub 1, we felt that was an important expenditure. With community colleges, a relatively small amount, we were fairly true to the governor's initial request. We didn't vary all that much. But one important area, not a high funding area, but an area that we think was important was funding part-time faculty office hours. Right now, we as a committee, I think, feel there should be full-time faculty, more full-time faculty hired in our community colleges. There was a proposal last year that didn't ultimately get into the budget, into law, that would allow us to hire more full-time faculty at our colleges. We think that full-time faculty are the ones that really provide the backbone for any college, again, CSU or UC too, but now we're talking about community colleges. They're the ones that make a department run, that make the colleges run, and frankly, that give students the advice and guidance they need to be successful, to graduate on time, to take the right courses, to make the right career choices. Since we don't have the dollars this year for full-time faculty enhancement that we would like, although there are apportionment dollars that can be used for hiring full-time faculty, we did want to make sure that there were office hours in the budget for part-timers, because part-timers who sometimes are discussed as freeway flyers, they go from one campus to another, they have no home base. And if their students want to talk to them about an issue that's come up in a classroom or maybe a personal issue that they need guidance on, the students can oftentimes not find them outside of the classroom where there are lines of other students and no privacy. By giving them office hours, we think we will make these part-timers much more valuable to the success of our students. It's really an important component of any student success initiative. So that's the gist of what we did, or the thrust of what we did in Budget Sub 1.